A wonderful good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Angewandte Festival 2020 and the panel Alien Life Between Brains, Bacteria and Matter. This event is being held in connection with the FWF peak-funded art and science project Kooperation. I'm the moderator, but I'm also the co-project lead together with Daniela Mitterberger and Tiziano Derme. And I also would like to take the opportunity to welcome people from the project team who I can see now who are online. Waltraud Hoheneder, Damian Minowski, Martin Gasser, and I hope I didn't forget anybody. We have a panel in front of us with a lot of different people. We have 90 minutes and the range of panelists is quite large, I would say. They're artists, curators, designers, architects, neuroscientists, and together we will explore new ways and practices to create an understanding of the relationship between humans, machines, and living matter. So to us, all matter is part of one world and is not separated from each other. And thoughts on communication between humans, their technologized environment, and living matter will be discussed or brought to the front, to the panel, illuminated from different perspectives. And hopefully seemingly unrelated worlds will be linked in our discourse. But before we get right into matters and presentations, I would like to welcome Alexander Damjanic. He's the director of the Center Focus Research at the Angewandte, and he's also the initiator of Angewandte Praxis, our cooperation platform here. And please,
yes,
it's up to you now to introduce the discussion.
Yes, thank you very much for providing me the opportunity for this very short detour on the context of this very event here today. The purpose of Angewandte Praxis, so to say, is to give a sneak peek into projects developed at the University of Applied Arts. And this very peak project by this dear project lead team of Barbara, Daniela and Tiziano is one of these projects which is so important for to get the whole picture, a better understanding, not only taking the road in research via the scientific methods, but also follow the stream of the artistic methods in a full compensated, full scope picture for research development here. So we have a very, very interesting panel here today, and thank you very much, the three of you, for bringing that together, all of you, and also other colleagues from the Angewandte involved in that. Hello Margarete and hello Lucy, for example, and also the others whom I can't now not only mention with all their names, but it's a great pleasure to have even not only all together with those people coming from outside to this very project, also to have these people from inside collaborating and coming together in this very project at once. I think this is a very good example internally and externally in the international relations of our research agenda, how you as a very good and best example do with your undertaking here at the university. So thank you very much for taking this stand and for following it and working on it together for the future. I'm really happy to have this also in the program of the festival of the Angewandte in this alternative mode, in this way, which gives us huge opportunities or good opportunities, and we're looking forward to the future of also having also physical crossroads, hopefully quite soon as well. So thank you very much. Have a great evening then. Barbara, please.
Thank you, Alexander, for the warm welcome to this panel. We will have short presentations by Tiziano Derme, Daniela Mitterberger, then by Lucy Strecker, by Margarete Jahrmann, and then by Rael C. and John Ting-Lu Su. And finally, we will conclude with Jens Hauser, who just before this panel gave a keynote lecture on biomediality. And well, I'd like to go right into the first presentation. if you have any, we will take one question after each presentation and have a little bit of conversation afterwards. So please write your question in the chat or just make yourself known, present via audio and video. The first speakers, and this is also the introduction to the project Kooperation. First speakers are Daniela Mitterberger and Tiziano Dermer. Hello. And they work between art and architecture, and in their practice made, they're already concerned with issues of biomediality and artificial intelligence. And this is also, of course, the topic of co-corporeality, responsive spaces in the era of biomediality. Please.
Good. I will start to share my screen.
Yes, share your presentation.
You let me know if everything works. Perfect. So you should see the screen now.
Yes. I think this we can skip this slide. These are the people.
Yes, maybe.
We will we will see further down the timeline, and I think just go ahead and start.
Perfect. So we are very happy to introduce to you the first iteration of co-corporeality. It's a we called our short introduction talk today "Communication Systems and Their Discontents," where we will also show the e-feeder, which is the first actual physical implementation of the theoretical concept that we started to develop. Co-corporeality is a project about meaningful interaction and engagement and possible trajectories between two biological systems. On the one hand, the human, on the other, a biomaterial or a bacteria. The question that we have is, how can we as humans speak with other subjects that we have that have a very different sensorial apparatus than us? And how might they experience time and space differently to us? And all that is in relation to how we can communicate with them. And especially which tools and which technologies, and in result also which vocabulary do we need to invent to enable us to communicate with this other species, with the bacteria, to send information from our side to the other, with the goal to create a space of co-realism. Here you see another diagram that we started to set up to describe this continuous dynamics of interaction between the human and the biomaterial. Co-corporeality aims to develop this new augmented biological model where we put the human in a continuous loop with a biomaterial. Machines, in this case, are mediators between humans and biomaterials, the bacteria. Machines should provide a communication interface to humans, but also control and stimulate the behavior of the biomaterials with certain stimuli. The machines should be able to react to humans directly. We don't want to use mouse nor keyboards, to use the human body as an interface directly. And for this, we were very interested in starting to work with computer vision. Computer vision in the same thought process to microscopic images, to X-ray images, start to actually make the body transparent. And these borders that we have between the human body and the environment starts to dissolve. Within co-corporeality, we started to develop different kind of machine vision algorithms, especially to develop this kind of vocabulary of non-verbal communication that we can use to start a communication with the biomaterial. So for this, we used body tracking. We started to look into gaze tracking, started to look into facial recognition, emotion detection.
So basically, I mean, co-corporeality, like Daniela mentioned, is based on these two bodies, like this kind of computational drive and as well as sort of a physical interface. And of course, we do understand in this talking about the physical interface that materiality is sort of understood as a carrier as a medium of physical and chemical processes. And when we state that, we certainly refer to the creation of a new kind of materiality of media, in a way. No? So our primary concern, in a way, is the development, for sure, of new substances that are able to mediate and rediscuss how we sustain, how we enhance, how we support life into a new domain of physical interfaces that are for sure beyond and outside the lab setting. The e-feeder, which is basically our contribution, our initial contribution to the Angewandte Festival, needs to be understood as a platform of interaction between humans and the microbial life. And this was made possible basically through the creation and to the help of a web interface that is questioning at the same time the use and the democratization of these tools, these surveillance technologies, and at the same time the new possible appropriations of different scales of performance, no? A scale that goes from the human to the bacteria. For the e-feeder, basically, we were culturing different, a very specific type of bacteria, which is E. coli, widely known as the guinea pig of the, let's say, the guinea pig of the research, current research developments in life science. And this bacteria will culture on a very specific medium, which is basically what is characterizing will characterize the performance of the performative aspect of the e-feeder itself. As I said, the e-feeder is currently made out of two bodies, let's say, like a digital body, which is this. It's basically a hack of Zoom. So basically, the users are coming to this virtual room. Their faces is constantly, let's say, recorded and evaluated. Their emotion is evaluated, and with their emotional, let's say, empathy to this kind of virtual room, they are able to activate an apparatus. Okay, this apparatus is currently stimulating the performance of the performance and behavior of the bacteria. Specifically, E. coli were cultured with two main medium. One is lactose, which is giving basically as a result of the metabolism of the bacteria this blue color. And another one was the introduction of this a very specific type of agar, this X-gal, which is conferring the bacteria this red color. So the idea was, of course, an interplay between what we can see and how the bacteria behave on a different time scale. So this involved, of course, talking. The idea of talking to different form of life involved the production of a shared understanding, no? And the production of a symbolic medium, where messages and information are never fixed nor stable, but they are constantly negotiated and reconstructed in this particular social setting.
What you can see here is some pictures of the setup that we actually, so it's built up in the chemical institute in the university, where we started to temporarily put our sensor system main computer lab to actually start to interact with the biomedia. For us, it was very important to put the eye of the human, the observer, especially via Zoom, in opposition of the behavior of the bacteria. And we had very different challenges facing that, because bacteria are behaving in a very different way than we expect. the audience cannot expect the real-time reaction that we're used to, because we are trained to understand performance as a one translation of human movement to the behavior of a material. And with bacteria, it's quite different. Of course, they're moving quite fast, but actually that's invisible to the human eye. But the change of the color that Tiziano was describing before actually allows us to understand that we are influencing the metabolism of the bacteria. And by visualizing the change of the environment of the bacteria, we start to understand actually our influence on the behavior. Yes, that was our short introduction of the e-feeder. You can visit it. It has interactive performance hours from 1 to 5 every day. That's the Zoom link. So you can log into Zoom. You need to be patient to be selected. Every 1 minute another Zoom visitor is selected. And your reaction, your facial expression, your emotion actually stimulates different kind of different nozzles are activated, and these different nozzles are actually influencing the behavior of the bacteria. We also want to thank, of course, the whole team. It's not just a few people. We are a very big team from the University of Applied Arts, from the OFI, and from the University of Vienna, as you can see here. And also on our homepage, we have a more precise or more condensed description on how this e-feeder is working, and especially with more descriptive credits who did exactly what on the e-feeder. And with that, we would like to end. If there are one question I heard we take now, if there's one question, we're happy to answer. Otherwise, we're happy to discuss the happiness of working with biomedia later. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Daniela and Tiziano. Well, we have a little bit of time. I think we should take 1 or 2 questions, or we can also, if there are no immediate questions, we can also maybe ask Damian or Martin, who were heavily involved in the production of this installation, to also maybe add something which has not been said yet to the e-feeder. Is there any questions? Maybe let's start with this.
Yeah. Maybe I shortly, a very short one.
Margarete, please.
If you watch somehow, do you also intervene into the process somehow? I don't know. Or is there a perspective that you want to integrate this eye of the beholder, the spectator, into a participant or anything? Yeah.
Exactly. So like for now, it's kind of a waiting line. So that means one person can intervene at a time. And that's also why it's communication and discontent, because we said we also understand the political realm of actually you manipulate this kind of future of the bacteria. And I think that's also one of the big discussion points that we had, where we said, for now, we understand that the vocabulary we are developing is at the beginning, but in the future, we're very interested in developing it further. So I think that's something that we really discovered while working with biomedia, was the slow development, like step by step, you're getting closer to it. Like just understanding how you can influence the growth of bacteria in a kind of predictive way was already very difficult for us. But for now, the visitors can interact in the growth of the bacteria, and the growth of the bacteria is then visualized with different media that is mixed that is stripped onto the bacteria. So you're not literally, you're seeing on the microscope image the bacteria itself, but the color change that you see, and that you're also influencing, because you're influencing the growth of the bacteria, is can be seen in the petri dish itself.
Yeah, there's one other question.
If I can add maybe something to the question of Margaret.
Okay, Tiziano, yeah.
I mean, for sure, the use of machine vision in this case is quite a problematic one in a way. So it's actually because those technologies are completely, completely full of biases, or they are unstable, or natively they are wrong in a way. So the idea of introducing, for sure, a different perspective from the one that is evaluated, it would for sure introduce, you know, a different, probably a different way of embedding a multitude of data acquisition and overcome this idea of this the problem of the bias could be. But for sure, currently we wanted to really use it as a provocation as well, to use the Zoom platform as a provocation, but as well to use these happily technologies somehow in a way that potentially they can inspire different debates. Okay.
There was one other, D.M. Barry has another question.
Another question.
Maybe very short, please.
Very short, very short.
Well, short question, short answer, and then we continue. Thank you.
I really like the setup, very shortly. And with the communication you set up, you definitely are saying something to the bacteria. And I'm wondering if it could also be, you know, one-way communication. It could also be seen just as a manipulation. So I'm wondering if you have a vision for some kind of bidirectional communication. That's my short question.
In the long run, definitely. Like, but we even had a discussion if our behavior is not already manipulated by the knowledge that your emotions trigger something within another biological media. So even if it's not how the bacteria moves is influencing you back, already the knowledge and the empathy changes something within you. In the long run, we keep on discussing how that is possible, how something so small as a bacteria can influence us back. And I think it's a big interest of us, definitely. And I think in the process we are working on it, it's a difficult question.
Yeah. I mean, you've created the vocabulary of communication with bacteria, and you have to create the vocabulary back also from the bacteria, and that's something. Yeah.
One big point is we need better tools to observe something so small. So like all this kind of, because the bacteria especially is communicating with chemical means. So tools to observe the different kind of eyes would be definitely necessary to develop that further, to even get more understanding what actually is happening on a petri dish. Thanks for your input.
Thanks.
We agree.
Thank you.
I will stop screen sharing.
Yes, because now I think we will go to the next speaker and presentation. I'd like to welcome and introduce Lucy Strecker. Hello, welcome. Lucy works as an artist and researcher in the fields of performance art and bioart. She's also now at the Angewandte Performance Laboratory, and her recent works include microbial keywording with Klaus Spieß, or the exhibition and symposium Applied Microperformativity, Life Arts for a Radical Socio-Economic Turn, which she also curated together with Jens Hauser. They showed that at the Angewandte Innovation Laboratory in 2018, but before in 2015, they also received the Prix Ars Electronica. Lucy, the stage is yours, please. We can't hear you. Please unmute your microphone.
I just would like to quickly add that the symposium we have already introduced was curated together with Jens Hauser and also Klaus Spieß. So just to have this here mentioned before I start.
Thank you.
And to contribute to this panel, I would like to read an excerpt from a conversation between the science historian and theoretician Hans-Jörg Reinberger and the media scholar and curator Jens Hauser, who we just met before. And that will appear in the special issue on microperformativity to be published by the Journal of Performance Research in September 2020. Also here referring to the symposium Applied Microperformativity in the frame of the FWF Elise Richter Peak project, The Performative Bioeffect. The discussion participants will be called by their initials. Hans-Jörg Reinberger as HJR, Jens Hauser as JH, and Lucy Strecker as LS. JH. Hans-Jörg Reinberger, your lecture Microperformativity and Experimentation at the Applied Microperformativity Symposium was both framed and thematically taken up, but also repeatedly interrupted and finally absorbed proverbally and biologically by an art performance called Microbial Keywording, developed by the artists Klaus Spies and Lucy Strecker. On the other hand, your discourse became part of a symbolic, scenic performance. On the other hand, the phonemes you articulated flowed into a microbiological process on a truly material level. The pH value dependent on the phonemes in the oral flora of your mouth was measured, and, depending on this, pheromones were released to microorganisms with the effect on these microorganisms on a level other than the linguistic, ultimately producing sense. Speaking about biological processes acted as a stimulus in real microperformative biological processes. How did you feel about this experimental performative situation? HJR. On the one hand, it fascinated me. On the other, it disturbed me. I was talking about the laboratory as the context in which such microperformative processes are used to generate knowledge about the living beings involved and, in a sense, make themselves speak by creating plugs with different fringes and colors in a petri dish, thereby sending meaningful signals to the experimenter, who in turn translates them back into the research process. In the experimental process, something like an endless loop is created through the interaction between the human performer and the viruses, which attack bacteria according to their own specificities, get them to burst, and thus generate forms of visualization. This kind of feedback on the microperformative level is what I described in my lecture. And in the context of the festival, it seemed to me as if the whole thing was being reproduced on a metaphorical level, with the same elements I described from the laboratory context: microbes that only grow under certain conditions, dependent on the pH value, and need their very specific environments. So I felt somehow torn between alienation effects and moments of recognition. LS. If we use terms such as sense or metaphorical, the claim of the artistic intervention, microbial keywording, is nevertheless the processes actually take place at the biological level in real laboratory apparatuses. It is that petri dishes are actually inoculated with the speaker's saliva, that the microbes' behavior and their protein structure changes beyond the metaphorical. We have tried to bridge the gap between the abstract, linguistic, and the somatic levels. How did you experience the second part of the performance in a separate room when a tube was put into your mouth and when you then repeated the phonemes of your keyword in an experiment? HJR. Yes. In this laboratory setup, which makes use of a microbial cosmos, one was not longer just an active spectator, but was involved as a component of the staging. LS. In view of the possibilities of biotechnology, the whole symposium attempted a change of perspective to explore how, within the performative arts and choreography, the typical questions of staging work are changing from how do people act, how do they move, how do they speak, to how can anthropocentric approaches be expanded? If one then thinks of findings such as that the interaction between microbes and the brain is a key factor in cognitive and mental processes, one now asks about the power of bacteria, etc., to act. HJR. Yes, in all the activities of the Vienna Symposium, one was always somehow struck by the fact that so much microbiology is constantly present in everything we do and are. Through our microbiome, which has partly been made visible here, we are practically always and everywhere in a microbial context, which we do not notice in our everyday experience at all. JH. In this sense, microperformativity also implies a sensation not only to other levels of spatiality, but also of temporality than those accessible to the mesoscopic phenomenology of the human animal, which so far correspond to the very broad concept of performativity in art and theater studies, linguistics, and anthropology. In your symposium contribution about microperformativity in vitro, life science experimentation, you emphasize the importance of compression and dilation. What is too small for being directly investigated must be enlarged. What is too big must be downsized. And what is too quick to be observed must be slowed down. And what is too slow to be observed must be accelerated. But why does the concept of performativity in general and microperformativity in particular make sense with regard to experimental practices in the natural sciences? What does it add to the acquisition of knowledge and understanding of experiments and epistemic objects? HJR. The term performativity was originally associated with actions or activities, but human ones. The concept of performativity was investigated in collaborative research fields over decades and was coined by Erika Fischer-Lichte, among others, to define action theory contexts. I, on the other hand, have always been interested in the actions you can induce in the objects you're experimenting with. What are they themselves doing? In experimentation, the concept of microperformativity can be made just as fruitful. What counts is not the experimenters who are somehow performing in the laboratory and pushing the petri dishes backwards and forwards and pouring something in here and sucking something out there, but that they're getting substances and organisms to interact with each other or creating an environment and initiating a process in which these interactions can take place and from which they themselves can withdraw. They want to know how the microbes behave and not what they have done to them. This is the conflict for any experimenter, that they naturally see themselves as people who are arranging all this, but precisely by arranging it, take themselves out of the game because they're not interested in their own actions. And that's when two performance contexts collide in the laboratory. That's what's really exciting and interesting for me. And these microprocesses, which are a rule and not accessible to our senses at all, are amplified so that we can perceive them. LS. You always emphasize the importance of the milieu as an artificially created environment and ask to what extent natural processes are still shown or mirrored here, or whether the artificial environment alienates the objects of observation so that they really react differently. HJR. To be able to represent a biological reaction taking place in the cell, in the test tube, I have to destroy the cell. To learn about life in an in vitro or test tube experiment, I smash it to pieces and have to separate one reaction from all other reactions that normally occur simultaneously in the cell. I assume that what I see there is a mirroring of the intracellular processes, which in this performative context, it is not, rather it is the performative context that creates the situation or the illusion. This is the contradiction, or rather the tension, from which the whole experiment lives. Following the biochemist and historian of science Herbert Friedman, what has been really new about test tube cultures is the claim and demonstration that tissue extracts could provide and represent not just what have been called natural products, compounds synthesized in tissues and organs, but natural processes as well. Friedman's claim, from now on, extract repeats or mirror processes. What is thus at stake in the transition from a living system to a test tube system is not just the transition from biology to chemistry or from physiological processes to organic substances. What is at stake is rather something akin to a reduplication of life, a life, so to speak, under other conditions. The milieu of the cell, or the milieu intérieur of the organism, to speak with the French 19th century physiologist Claude Bernard, is being replaced by milieu composed in the test tube. In this process of repeating or mirroring life, however, what is implied is a permanent threat of aberration which confronts its practitioners with the equally permanent question of how far in the mirror we are still able to see nature. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for this great performance and insight into different kinds of conversations. Does anybody have a question? No? Okay, I'll have one. I wonder, you've been, for a long time, you have been developing the topic and also performances around micro-performativity. And I wonder, why is this topic so dear to you and or important, and why do you think does it matter?
I agree that there's a limit to the human expression in these times, and opening it up towards a sensing and an extended sensing towards nature, to me, includes these other than human entities. I've been brought up in a context where actually the man on stage was the center of attention, and to leave this without leaving the possibilities of being included in this dialogue is something I keep questioning.
Thank you. Any other quick question? Yes, please.
And again, I'm sorry, I'm so vocal, but the whole discussion is really interesting for me as a scientist. And Lucy, really, there were many points I'd love to discuss. Really nice, but towards the end, or at the end, you were talking about this, what I would call reductionism in science, taking life into a test tube and talking about it as being kind of a threat to a threat of replacing life. I think, if I understood it right. And as a scientist, my concern with this reductionism is rather that that it's a threat to how we see life, that we think that if it happens in a test tube, it happens in real life, and that's very problematic in science. So I don't see it so much as a replacement as much as being something that could misdirect science and lead us as scientists or society kind of in the wrong direction. So I'm not sure if it's we can talk longer about this some other time, but I'm not sure if it really.
Yeah, it was actually an advert for the journal to come about. No, it's
exactly. this is something we should definitely discuss. And yeah, cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question. I think we should head towards the next speaker, Margarete Jahrmann. She also, I would say, she also shares the, how can I say it, that she wants to heighten the human perception, but in different ways, like Lucy, or what I understood from Lucy. Margarete Jahrmann is a media epistemologist and an internationally well-known artist in the topics of activism, urbanity, and play. And she's also the designer of numerous art games and game artworks. In her field, she also holds professorships at the Angewandte in Vienna and at the Zurich University. And she also received the Prix Ars Electronica in 2003, amongst other prizes. So I think without further ado, Margarete, the stage is yours. Please start your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much also for the kind introduction. And yeah, media art follows me. Also, it was this year with the media art prizes of the city of Vienna. So it is connecting all the time. But what is it? Is it inner space or outer space? That's what I want to question. And that's what is linking me to Barbara Imhoff. That's why I show this wonderful image of a meditation about inner space in outer space. And this is epistemic objects and epistemic spaces that we want to open with a lot of performative settings. And I want to speak briefly about and take up the introduction of and the keynote of Jens today and of the discourse that was following, where alien milieus are discussed. So what is an alien communication, you said, and you speak now about the whole experimental system, and I take up this challenge of an alien milieu, enter the critical play with AI, with emotion recognition that you had, and discuss further inner self and passive input devices. So not the active clicking, activating that we are used in socio-politically trained to, but also to have a passive milieu where we are not necessarily acting by will, but acting by intuition, acting by being together into a neuroscience responsiveness as a topic. And that's what I want to show from yesterday night. That's what we were having here at the Angewandte Festival, where we had a sort of milieu that we were introducing with chat in participations. And I was participating also as LS, Lucy. I just noticed it's Ludic Society. But we were having instructions from an audience and putting in the brain, the passive interface, the brain data, in order to generate a pattern by going into interaction with a remote audience, with a remote environment. And it was quite important to play with this empty space that I'm showing right now in relation to the inner space. And the image you see is a connection of two brain-computer interfaces that form one patterns. And the more people we have to log on with interfaces, it was planned for 4 to 5 people originally who could not all log in for personal reasons. But this was a milieu. Is it alien or is it very inside? This is for sure alien. I hope you all can hear me. I was a bit stuck, but I think it's fine, or it is okay? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Daniela. So for sure, the technical setup is very alien. So I felt it every evening for the first 14 days of the lockdown. We were broadcasting every evening from home with such a similar setting, and now every week. And I feel totally much more alienation than I felt before. On the other hand, connections that are arising, and these dots of the different data that we transfer there live via the internet, this is a critical play from my point of view, and also for the participants, because they also get an agency to generate an object. It reminded me of your e-feeder, to generate a collective piece in a way, but also a a joint alien thing that we are creating here. And so here, normally I don't talk, but here you see, and also the audio aspect. So this is from last week. I show you very recent place with the situation to stay in virtual environments. Also the audio aspect. It's no communication with words and not talking, only with chatting, with giving instructions, with a sort of algorithmic, but in performances instruction, in conceptual arts instructions, we're having a meaning to trigger participation also. And also the audio is a generative sound that is made out of the data of all the different interfaces. Also of interfaces of different types. Here we are wearing two different types even, so I'm very happy. Two different commercial types. This means we are not dependent on one platform or one commercial interface or one big interface. So chat via YouTube, using existing platforms and bringing these together into a hybrid milieu where we perform in a liveness situation, for sure not about being alive, but about participating in a live enjoyment, a jouissance, I would say, also in a series of communication without words, with different aspects also of a methodological interpretation of a star environment. It looks a bit like a cosmological environment. That's why the cosmic metaphor is fitting very well. What we were generating out of these input devices, the neuromatic brainwave broadcasts. I didn't mention actually that in May, we started in March, but in May we had a kickoff of a FWF peak project at the Angewandte that also is called neuromatic interfaces, a new form of media art, critical play with neurointerfaces. And this broadcast was in preparation or a spontaneous reaction, as we even couldn't enter our research places. You also were referring to to measurement in biological data. So what is measured? What are we really measuring with such devices that biofeedback systems? How far can we go into our thoughts, our data in the brain, our thinking? So the alien measurement is a subconscious measurement. It's not our cognitive discourse, not reading our thoughts, but for example, reading our bias. You were talking about this. And this overview you see here in the background is, you see 17th April on the left, on the 1st, it goes to 24th April, 1st of May, 15th. Each one is 5th till 12th of June. We didn't do it from last week, but every week you see the data of the broadcast and of our inputs and the feedbacks and communication that we were having during this performance session. For me, it also was a question, what remains of a performance? Photos, video, but this is also what remains, and it can have a different appearance. It can have its own life if you want. We can have a meditation and we can have a new connection and different appearance in this critical play with the neurointerfaces, where we go in an exchange into a hybrid, in a milieu, let's say, with the experimental system in an artistic research setting. That is an interest that I have at the moment, and where I hope and think that we can link among different research projects. I'm happy also, and thanks to Barbara again for this
resistance to the digital imperative of online liveness in times of pandemic situations, personal measurement and biodata contribution. Neuromedical devices will be reconstructed by allowing insights into brain function. But using these interfaces as creative output devices as a participatory and creative tool of art.
So this is the aim, a creative tool to change these interfaces. Allow us to address this research question in an artistic way.
Brainwave broadcast.
Actually, we were using only refer also to the research contribution that we have at the moment with the Central Focus Forschung, where you can have a look to the full length of this video. So Alexander will for sure say something more. So it is about, this is here, this von Ramon y Cajal, the drawing from an artist who was a neuroscientist also. Very intense in the development or in the discourse about the neuron as a single neuron or as a network concept, where different opinions were melting together. So that was before the modern sciences, let's say, started. And this critical play with AI was also a starting point for me with this project. In the background, you see the same neurons with the green Alexa Fluor green fabric that I was producing for an installation also. And this was an installation in January, shortly before the lockdown, also at the Angewandte Innovation Lab, where emotion recognition was part of an interactive play with face recognition, emotion recognition as a close connected approach, where we go into further exchange, I'm sure, with this research group that is presented now with the Kooperation project. And you were lying down on an examination bed also in the live performance in a sonification. And this was a tribute, this performance, to our friends in Hong Kong, because you will see briefly in Hong Kong, fog bombs were used in order to fight the emotion recognition, the face recognition, the identification before we were wearing masks. And this was expressed in this performance. And then I'm done. I'm going into a hybrid with the devices. I'm measuring data, face recognition, and also the device itself. So thank you. Those who were there know it ended in total fog that I cannot do right here now, but thank you very much. That's it. Thanks. I stop.
Thank you, Margarete.
As well, yeah. Okay.
For this very nice and interesting talk.
That's why I wanted to show the different ones. So I hope that this course can go on.
Yes, I think so. I think we have time for a question. Anybody has a question? Daniela?
Yes, I would have a question, because I think it's quite interesting, because now due to this global pandemic, we start to have performances via YouTube live streams or Zooms or behind the computer. So what do you think changes in the interaction of the audience when you actually use the webcam rather than in an exhibition setting? Or do you think, what does that change? How can we learn from that?
Yeah. So for me, it was very important that that also the setting as performer changed very much. So I always worked also with online elements. So in a way, it was quite interesting, or it also showed that it is not demonstrated that we can simultaneously participate in different levels, as I said, as a hybrid in such a milieu with the text and with the audio and with the data grid. So the feedback with the audio is much more than only the video, but it can be also the face, of course, but it has different levels, different dimensions, and that is the difference. It is hard to get any input or data or even any text statement or so in a live situation. So it opens up these channels that are normally harder to access, and of course we are missing this a lot of aspects which I don't have to mention, I think. So it changes that from my point of view, that the interaction is a different form and a different setting, and maybe also more precise in a way, more focused. But still I miss live, and I still like more the live situation. Don't ask me why. Others know maybe.
Well, as long as we are humans and have these physical bodies, I guess this is why we prefer this. Thank you. I think one other short question, if there is any. No, I can't see. Well, then thank you, Margareta. I think we head towards the Ray and Joanne, towards the next speakers. Welcome. You're coming from furthest away, although it doesn't really matter in this kind of setting. I'd like to welcome Joan Ting Kyu Su and Ray LC. Joan is a human-centered designer and researcher who leverages her empathy and curiosity to reimagine the future and to design meaningful experiences and to create measurable impact through technology, strategy, and collaboration. And Ray LC is, and I have to quote this from his CV. I'll tell you first what he is not, and then probably I can reveal what he is. So yeah, Joan is based in Taipei, but also in the US, and Ray is based in New York. So Ray is not just an artist or just a scientist, designer, or engineer, despite working in all of these fields. Ray applies psychology, technology, and creative practice to build interactive experiences that enable empathetic communication from the multidisciplinary perspectives of neuroscience, installation art, social robotics, and storytelling. This was a quote from his own writing, actually. Okay, welcome. Please start your presentation.
Thank you for the introduction, Barbara. Okay. So, hello everyone. My name is Joanne Shi, and here with me is my partner, Ray C. So, given the core corporeality's investigation of interaction between human and living matters of vastly different scales, Ray and I also want to take you into a different dimension, the quantum role, to explore quantum matter interactions. So today we'll explore the uncertainty of particle interaction in the quantum scale and connect those unfamiliar interactions to the human uncertainty, especially given the current global situation. I want to start with a personal story first about uncertainty. So I grew up in Taiwan and moved to the US in 2014. And fast forward to March 2020, this year, I graduated from my master's program and I was planning to start a career in Chicago. In that same month, I started to stay in quarantine like everyone else. So in this picture, you can see that I stay in my one-bedroom apartment with my boyfriend and my roommate. It's a pretty crowded space. During those days, I have a set routine and daily goals to kind of structure my time in this apartment. On one hand, I was really clear about my daily position, where I will be and what I could do. On the other hand, I feel pretty lost about my momentum. So I asked myself, how fast will I find a job? But there was no real answer. Nevertheless, I was quite content during those days. And this sort of lifestyle ended around March 20th when I received a call from my parents who live in Taiwan. And in that phone call, I learned that my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And at that moment, I felt a lot of things. It feels like my reality was flipped upside down. And I felt my body and my mind trembling. And, you know, there's that vibration that continues and never really goes away. And I could no longer imagine where I'll be tomorrow or in a year. Will I be in the same apartment? Will I be on a flight? Will I be in the US or will I be back in Taiwan? The probability of my day-to-day position and the routine suddenly become unclear, yet I was really clear of my momentum, my eagerness, and my energy to be the support of my mom. And that has become the driving force of my new lifestyle. I'm now back in Taiwan, adjusting to this new lifestyle. It is exhausting at times, heartwarming at times. They both come from that same vibrating energy within me. And this huge transition of two different types of uncertainty probed me to further explore what uncertainty means in different contexts. And I'm a designer, but I'm also a physicist. So as a physicist, I look into the quantum world. So in the quantum world, there is a phenomenon called wave-particle duality, which states that any quantum matter could be described as a particle or as a wave. For example, an electron could sometimes behave like a ball bouncing from one place to another, you know, like this graph on the left-hand side. But sometimes it could also behave like a wave. So like a string on your guitar, it has a certain tone and frequency, but the location of the string is harder to define. And this particle wave duality results in the uncertainty principle in quantum physics. So for particle-like behavior, we could easily determine its position, but it is harder to predict its momentum. And for wave-like behavior, it is the opposite. We are certain about its momentum and frequency, but it's hard to determine its position. And weirdly enough, those two behaviors cannot be observed together. And I found this uncertainty principle not only fascinating in the quantum scale, but it also somehow connects to how I view uncertainty in the human scale. So now zooming back to my human story and back to the human scale. I almost feel like a particle during my time in quarantine in the US. I'm very certain about my position, where I am, and what I could do, but I was lost about my momentum. I was lost about my mental energy of who I will become. On the other hand, as I was coming back to Taiwan, I feel more like a wave. I feel the vibration within me, it's loud and clear, but I'm uncertain of my position in the routine every day. This uncertainty model exposed the trade-off of between to be and to become. And as I start to embrace this model, I start to feel a sense of calmness. When I don't know who I will become, I try to focus on who I am right now. And when I don't know exactly who I am in this moment, I try to focus on my momentum and who I can become in the future. And so that's a little interesting translation between quantum physics and uncertainty in the human scale. And Ray will continue to explore the uncertainty in human scales and how these trade-offs could mean to us.
Thank you, Joanne. So I'm going to start from the other end and think about it from the human perspective. And as we all know about coronavirus, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty involved. You know, what's going to happen next? Is there going to be a vaccine? You know, when is it coming back, etc. There's certainly a lot of economic uncertainty and also societal impact, and we don't know how long this is also going to last. And I also want to highlight some of the more important things that less people have been thinking about, and that's another effect of COVID-19 is causing dangers in the way that we have anxiety and anxiety in our relationships and our inability to communicate effectively because we don't no longer have face-to-face communication. But what we decided to think about is actually from another point of view is that actually, despite this, we actually really crave uncertainty in our lives, right? So this slot machine basically is thinking about the times when we really get addicted to playing slots, for example, because we crave that uncertainty that's involved. We also see it in all kinds of situations in our life. For example, sports and games and new relationships. And like, why do we like horror movies? Well, horror movies are really entertaining because there's a lot of uncertainty involved. And so I thought about this actually from my own, childhood point of view. So I want to take you all back to this dream that I've had since I was, in the kindergarten days. And so imagine this like perfect kind of blank space where everything that you have and desire and imagine is possible, right? So whatever you dream of, it will materialize off thin air almost, right? So the form of the architecture basically gives you whatever you wanted, right? Now, if you think about this sort of an alien life that we have, it's actually kind of boring, right? What makes this kind of life tolerable is actually instead of this being this utopia, you actually want to not have you want to actually have a single plot of place where this uncertainty and this intrigue is sort of localized in some ways. And that single plot is this kind of small city I have indicated on this upper right in the diagram. And this picture is sort of a representation of my entire dream. As you think about it, it is actually something that we actually necessarily need and something that we need to embrace even during these quote unquote uncertain times. And so, for example, some of the things that we can imagine during this uncertain time, why do we give to each other, right? We don't expect anything back. That's the way that we process uncertainty. If we did, then we would have a certainty of what to receive and how people would respond, for instance. Also, you can remember the situation of like imagining, right? So in these times when we don't have the ability to really communicate as effectively with each one of us, we actually have to communicate using imagination. We actually can't see. And that uncertainty actually drives this intrigue. And so that uncertainty actually gives us this hope that we have in this world. And finally, I think most importantly, in regards to relationship, we actually have to now trust without actually knowing the specifics. And in fact, it's kind of a trust not only of your partner, for instance, but it's also a trust of the way that you two are basically progressing together, or us as humans are actually progressing together over time. And it is the case that we're trusting that progress, and however way we end up, we are actually still in it together in some sense, even if we don't know what about each other, because we don't have that day-to-day knowledge that we have with each other. And so I just want to summarize, getting back to that level of the of quantum mechanics that we have before, that Joanne talked about before. And it's the idea that there's a sort of essential trade-off between what is to be and what is to become. When you know who you are and you don't necessarily know kind of where you will be in the future, that's sort of a trade-off between you know what you're doing and you know where you're going, but you don't necessarily know who you are or where you are. And so this is kind of leads to a sort of calmness in a way. That uncertainty is actually something we can embrace. And this embrace comes with not actually knowing, but actually we want to not necessarily know where we're going. So I just want to also thank everybody who's been involved in our project. There's also sort of a web experience that we've been starting to do, and Rudra and Sinyun, who are involved with that project, in the future we'll be basically creating a web installation of these ideas and kind of a game for people to go through. And so I want to thank them as well. And I want to also thank Kooperation, of course, and also all the other panelists. And I feel like this is such a really intricate fit of the way that these puzzles of all the different projects that we've been shown here come together. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray and Joan, for your presentation. Is there any questions? Anybody has a question? Yeah, Margarete, please.
If I might, yeah. Thank you, Joanne, for your touching presentation. Thank you, Ray, for also having this excellent project introduction of this uncertainty is my question. So you, because do I understand you right, that this uncertainty is also one of your main focus, and also there is this wonderful book, The Cunning of Uncertainty from Helga Nowotny, where she also speaks of this craving for certainty and uncertainty then as also a chance and in context, and also what are the positive aspects of it, or is it something very ambiguous for you also? And how do you implement it?
Yeah, I guess I can start. Thank you for the interesting question, and thanks for the reference as well. We basically did a lot of research into kind of uncertainty in these times, and also thinking about what it is like. I think one of the things that you're pointing at makes sense, but we also kind of thought about it in the sense of like in these times it's actually kind of a paradox because everything's kind of flipped out upside down. So what we consider was you know. Things that we can live through, for example, and relationships that we have actually kind of goes backwards, sort of. And so that's, I think this is why kind of where we started from the thinking is that it's sort of a paradox of uncertainty where you actually embrace and enjoy and like it and love it, actually. And actually that's sort of involved with something we haven't talked about here, but the way that we deal psychologically with uncertainty. It's kind of a well-known some research in psychology, and we dug into that. That basically indicates that actually, for example, if you want to get yourself not to do something, the way to do it is not to tell yourself not to do that. The way is actually to ignore it. And this is sort of our kind of paradigm with uncertainty as well. And the idea is that actually by loving it, not just accepting it, but actually loving, falling in love with it, that's how you kind of move forward, right? So anyways, we'll I think this is a little bit abstract so far. We are creating that web experience, and I think we'll be able to demonstrate more of these ideas more concretely in that experience as well.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, kind of our viewpoint is just like Ray say, looking at how to embrace uncertainty, despite of this trade-off of not knowing about a certain thing, and applying the the nature of uncertainty principle in physics, kind of being okay and being fine with the fact that we don't necessarily always know all the information about a particle or a human being, and yeah, that's kind of where how we view the uncertainty.
Thank you. Is there another question by somebody? I mean, what struck me is basically that the topic of uncertainty is always very inherent in any kind of artwork, installation, or whatever, when dealing with biology, and so there is you can't control, or we think we can control it, or we're trying to control biology, but we cannot. So, and probably we also cannot control brains yet. I'm just thinking about the title, Alien Life Between Brains, Microbes and Biology. So and matter. So this is something which I find interesting, that this topic of uncertainty ties everybody together in this kind of virtual room, or their works too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I also wanted to say one more thing is that actually we didn't necessarily talk about it in that context, but actually it connects with what Lucy and Jens was presenting in some ways as well, because you can also think of the uncertainty principle as a way of the observer and not, basically not knowing how to, piece out the details when you're observing, and that there's necessarily an uncertainty about a trade-off really between different pieces of information that's possible. And you think about human terms, that's also kind of one way we can think about, like, for example, if I'm a sort of a journalist, from a journalist viewpoint, if I want to get to know someone, well, one of the things that we thought about is actually there's kind of two ways of being there, right? There's one is you try to get to know someone, but the other way is to try to actually be that person. And when you do one thing, you're less well on the other, right? So it kind of connects with Lucy's work, and I think everybody's work is actually super fascinating.
Thank you. Any more comment? Okay, we will close very punctual, but we still have now one last sort of summary by Jens Hauser. We agreed in a preparatory meeting that we asked Jens as a curator and theorist, scholar, to actually give a summary of all the presentations and maybe contextualize them in the field, which is well, probably a little bit broader than just biomediality or bioart. Jens Hauser is a curator and theorist who deals with the interaction of art and technology in relation to the trans-historical staging of liveness, including the use of bio, and then in brackets, technological media in art. And you probably already know, but he's currently collaborating with Lucy Strecker on a special issue on micro-performativity for the journal Performance Research. So I'd like to ask Jens to take the stage and to, well, maybe reflect on what has been said and discussed.
Yeah, that's a very challenging task, given the extreme variation of these contributions. And I have to admit that I have not prepared anything. So all what I'm trying to improvise is just thinking loud. And I've taken some notes, and based on these notes, I just would like to create a kind of thematic thread, which is of course linear and chronological, while it should be completely non-linear and not chronological. And maybe is to start with the last intervention. It's interesting to see in how far you turn the uncertainty paradigm from the uncertainty Heisenberg principle, from the very quantum scale physics to social lives and social uncertainty and so on. So in this sense, this scaling up and down is something that probably traverses all the interventions. To know in how far feedback loops between human and non-human agencies can be thought of. And it also reminded me the definition that I gave in my lecture earlier about life from the very principles of chemistry, biology, nucleic acid, to more structurally relevant complexity that unfolds in human psychology. So there was this kind of scaling, not only in terms of physical scales, but in terms of increase of complexity. And I found this very interesting because right now that you both in this last intervention combined the very quantum physical the dimension between the position and the momentum as a kind of driving force of destabilization, of desontolization, not only to move from ontologies to flat ontologies, but actually to unstable epistemologies, reminded me an article that we have both, Lucy and I think, rereading also in the light of this forthcoming issues on microperformativity, which is the 2003 published article by Karen Barat on precisely posthumanist performativity toward an understanding of how matter comes to matter. And Of course, this article, as Bharat is a physician and a theoretician of feminist studies, comes from Niels Bohr's own critiques of Newton-based physics, and to question not only the stability of ontological constructions, but of the representational idiom that becomes a performative idiom. And I just came across, just by listening to you, a quote in which she also is relating to something that Lucy brought up in her presentation of in how far language was measured, captured, and transformed into something physical in the microbial keywording and experimentations. So Bharat says that the epistemological framework that Niels Bohr, develops in terms of quantum physics, rejects both the transparency of language and the transparency of measurements. And we talked a lot about how things are being measured and in how far the fact that something is being measured affects the very ontology of the things. And so she writes that he rejects the presupposition that language and measurement perform mediating functions. So they're not just mediators, they are makers. So language does not represent states of affairs, and measurements do not represent measurement-independent states of being. And these aspects come very strongly when we think of what is all destabilized today, from physics to geology. If you think of Elisabeth Povinelli's writing about the agency even of stone or geological affairs, so physical, the chemical, the biological, up to the social. And I also think what you said about the Zoom situation. We are in a situation where the performativity, the very micro-performativity of the virus is messing up large-scale human action at this point. And it's not just happening on a metaphorical, but on a metabolical and a physiological level, as we have seen. I think that beyond all this new media constellations that we meet each other and cheer each other by Zoom, that it will also lead to a larger destabilization of the mesoscopic phenomenological bubble within which the human animal is still imprisoned. And I think it also will lead to a kind of material culture that we very strongly feel in all the interventions, that we not only want to have a name for these non-human agencies, but we want to interact with them somatically, physically, bodily, and in a co-corporality that is just not an exchange of information through a communication channel, but actually to pair uni or bidirectional relationships on a kind of level that is a material level. So at this level, I found it very interesting that when we still think of Zoom, that brings us together now. But for example, artwork in the future will look at this macro scales, for example, in how far zoonosis as the very origin of this actual crisis that makes us all meet on Zoom is also linked to deforestation, to ecological concerns, to the decrease of biodiversity, and not just the kind of animal sold in any kind of Chinese market, but that there will be an ecological reasoning of materiality, creating zoonosis through deforestation, us ending up on Zoom. So I think there will not only be a kind of extrapolation to saying, oh, we have this new Zoom art, we have Zoom drawings, we have new street art, celebrating the new heroes of the medical system and so on. I think there will be a general questioning of the materiality of all the technical media interfaces that actually bring us together, which will also result as one of the crises. Then I think a general term, what I feel in a lot of the interventions, be it Margarete, be it Tiziano and Daniela, is also that there is a need, obviously, to move from the symbolic to the somatic. And there's something, a kind of change from script to embodiment. There is a kind of raise of concern for the other than human scales on which these non-human beings happen. Also, the question of temporality and the question of spatiality, which also transcend in the last intervention, because this is precisely the oscillation between the momentum and the position. It's also because it's the oscillation and it's about the spatiality. So it has to do both with temporality and spatiality. There is probably relation to liveness to liveness. So, in one thing that we can see, there was in digital culture a very large excitement about liveness with a V, and we moved to an excitement about live with an F. That doesn't contradict each other, but that rather the live with a V and the live with an F complement increasingly each other. And this has to do with this co-corporality that is more than just a kind of paralinguistic kind of extrapolation of information exchange. And talking about information exchange is, I think, something that also moves into other direction when we think that maybe what is important is not what is informed, but what is interpreted. And this is also one of the fundamental principles of biosemiotics, which also is very crucial in the attitude of artistic research that Lucy Strecker on the one hand, and also Tiziano and Daniela are doing, in how far it makes sense. And the making sense, it's not a question of information, it's a question of interpretation. And against the grips of all the information-based genetic theories, the code-based theories, I think a lot of biosemiotic thinking is that precisely the sense-making instances are acquired through interpretation. So in a certain way, life makes sense in a very biosemiotic sense, and it materially makes sense. So there is this question also in how far we as in our self-constructed human mesoscopic bubble, we interact then with these other non-human agencies. And I was very excited by the way that Daniela and Tiziano also talked about architectures, biological architectures that would be reactive, but that would be living architectures, and in how far we would interact with them. It's an old question to think of architecture not only in terms of visuality, but also in terms of haptics, in terms of smell, in terms of proximity, which was, for example, outlined by a Finnish theoretician, Palasma, in The Eye of the Skin, where he's advocating architectures that are more tangible, that are more physical, and that just not are constructed for the eye. And I know that Tiziano also worked a lot with another architect that is doing biological architecture, namely Zbigniew Oksiuta, who has also been working against gravitational architecture, and how when we overcome the gravitational condition of thought, that may change also our human centeredness. So I want to come back to this just because a lot of neuro projects have been involved here, and to relate an experience from New York, where some years ago, Guy Ben-Ari was his team, and I mentioned him earlier in the keynote, with the self interaction between a human performer and a rock star in a petri dish, using red nerve cells in order to create musical patterns. They created a very interesting physical three-dimensional spatial installation called Silent Barrage, in which you could, as a human being, interact with the poles in a kind of forest that was mimicking an array of electrodes that in a petri dish that is measuring nerve activity. And the actual behavior of the humans in the actual forest of neuronal poles was then having an impact on the real behavior of the nerve cells. So they were stimulated actually physically, biologically, by the presence of the humans. So what did the human do? The humans would just mimic their own interfaces and would just try up and jump and here and there and make gestures with their arms, and not understand that these physical gestures may only have an impact in time, because the temporality of the neurons is a very different one. So they would affect with their gestures actually the neural cultures in the petri dish, but maybe 2 or 3 days later. So there was this question raised also about the different temporalities and what happens when we as our human scale try to interact with non-human agencies. So I think that, yeah, for me, there was a lot of huge inspiration when it comes to how to imagine this co-corporality in all of your talks. And I think I have finished my thread of spontaneous improvisation and thinking loud. So I think it's a good moment to open up the space for further discussion.
Unfortunately, we are right on time. And so we'll have to delay conversation. Thank you so much, Jens. I also think that after your final statement or summary statement, there's not, I think it's a good way to conclude this symposium. And I'd like to thank Ray, Lucy, Joanne, Margarete, Daniela, Tiziano, Alexander, and Jens very much for your input. And I'd also like to thank the audience for your virtual presence, your feedback and input. The panel has been recorded, will be available on our Co-Corporality website, but also on the Angewandte Festival website. So for now, thanks so much to everybody. I wish you a good summer night. Enjoy. Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.